The horrifying discovery. At around 6:43 a.m., a jogger named Claire Lyons was running her usual trail near the eastern edge of the Green Rock Forest Preserve. Her headphones were piping soft rock when she stopped mid-step, frozen by the sight of something unusual just a few feet ahead by the bushes. It looked like a mannequin or something else, she later recounted, her voice trembling. It wasn't a mannequin. What Claire found was the horribly mutilated body of a young woman, half covered in damp leaves and dirt, her face swollen and unrecognizable. Her clothes were torn, and the striking details that followed shocked even the most hardened investigators. Her undergarments were missing, and there were unmistakable marks of strangulation across her neck. The victim's hands were clenched into fists, suggesting a valiant but futile fight for survival. Green Rock Sheriff's Department received the call within minutes. Sheriff Daniel Cole, a seasoned veteran with over 25 years on the force, was the first to arrive on the scene alongside Deputy Rachel Myers. Emerging from their patrol car, even Cole, who'd seen his fair share of grim crime scenes, muttered under his breath, "Jesus Christ." Myers gagged, gripping her notepad as she forced her gaze towards the dense canopy of trees instead of the horror in front of her. The scene was cordoned off almost immediately. Yellow police tape flickered in the gentle sway of the wind. Forensics swept in soon after, dressed in their signature white suits with latex gloves snapping into place. The body was confirmed to belong to a female in her late 20s or early 30s, showing multiple bruises along the jawline, ribs, and arms. Evidence of struggling indicated that the woman had likely been ambushed and then incapacitated, but it was the signature marks around her neck, a deep rough ligature mark likely caused by some kind of rope or cord, that truly disturbed the investigation team. What stuck out most to Detective Linda Greaves, the lead investigator later called to the scene, was what wasn't there. "The underwear's gone," she said aloud, though mostly to herself. "Why take that if this was just about murder?" "Could be some freak's trophy," Cole replied, taking a slow drag of the cigarette he wasn't even supposed to be smoking within the crime scene parameters. "This is no random killing, Myers," he finally turned to his deputy. "Whoever did this planned it and... damn, I have the feeling this ain't the first time." Adding to the tension, distinctive tire tracks were found along the soft dirt path just 15 feet away. A large boot print was spotted, size 11 or 12, a clear indication of a man's footprint. Shards of duct tape were recovered near the body, sticky with mud, likely used to restrain the victim before her tragic murder. "This guy knew what he was doing," Greaves added later. By noon, the entire Green Rock Preserve was swarmed with officers, forensic experts, and crime analysts. The victim's ID, purse or phone, nowhere to be found. But the spiral into unease deepened when word got out about a similar discovery 9 months earlier in a neighboring town, just 20 miles away. A young woman, strangulated, her lifeless body abandoned in a similar state. Could this be a pattern? Was Green Rock unwittingly home to a serial predator? Local reporters from news outlets started to crowd near the police barricade. "Anything to share on the victim's identity yet?" shouted one persistent journalist. Sheriff Cole waved them off with a gruff, "We'll hold a press conference when there's something to say." As night fell over Green Rock, the once peaceful community found itself shrouded in fear. Little did they know, this was merely the beginning of a nightmare, a horrifying chain of events that wouldn't end until the ghoul behind these gruesome murders was brought to light. The name Green Rock Forest quickly became synonymous not with tranquility, but with tragedy. Before long, whispers spread from house to house as residents double-checked their locks, wondering if they too might become a target of this cold-blooded monster lurking in the shadows. The deranged killer and trophies. "What kind of person does something like this?" Deputy Rachel Myers asked, her voice low but trembling, as she sat across from Detective Linda Greaves in the dimly lit conference room of the Green Rock Sheriff's Station. The hum of the overhead fluorescent light added an eerie undertone to the silence between them. In the center of the table lay neatly documented evidence: crime scene photos, casts of boot prints, duct tape fragments coated with dirt, and the grim autopsy report from the recent victim. Greaves studied one of the photos, a close-up of the victim's bare, bruised neck. "A monster," she said finally, placing the photo down as if the weight of it burned her fingers. The gruesome details of the case had begun to draw troubling connections. This wasn't just about killing, this was something dark, something ritualistic. Each victim had their underwear removed, sometimes their bras, sometimes both, and not a single trace of their personal items was ever left behind. Their clothing was either shredded or missing entirely. Whoever this killer was, he wasn't just interested in taking lives. He wanted something more. "It's a goddamn trophy," Sheriff Cole muttered as he entered the room, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand and a deep scowl etched into his weathered face. "He's keeping them, his prizes, like he thinks it's worth something." Myers rubbed her arms as if the thought itself chilled her skin. "A piece of them?" she asked hesitantly. "But why? Why the hell do lunatics do anything?" Cole snapped, though it was more frustration than anger. He dropped his coffee on the table, leaned against the edge, and folded his arms. "You ever hear of Ted Bundy? Kept victims' heads like they were ornaments. Jeffrey Dahmer took souvenirs from his kills, even food. It's control, Myers. Hell, it's ego. They're sick bastards who think no one can touch them." Greaves interrupted. "It's about revisiting the moment, having something tangible from what they've done. These urges, they don't stop when the act is over. They feed on it, relive it over and over again through whatever trophy they've stolen." Myers swallowed hard, her mind trailing back to the young victim they discovered days earlier, the quiet, unassuming spot in the woods where she died the most violent of deaths. Her voice cracked. "So you're saying, this isn't just about murder for him?" Cole shook his head. "No, murder's only part of it. The thrill is bigger than that. Taking their lives, sure, but keeping a piece of them? That's what he carries home like some goddamn animal dragging its kill back to the den. And we're still looking for this den." Greaves tapped her pen against a crude map of Green Rock Forest on the table. Red markers indicated previous scenes where evidence or victims had been found. "We only caught this first string of clues because of Lyons the jogger. We're flying blind after that. He could be hiding these trophies anywhere. His house, his car, hell, even a random shed in the woods." There was a long pause. Finally, Cole ran a hand over his face. "And with every passing day, Rachel, we're not just losing ground. We're giving him another chance. The pattern emerges." By now, it was clear, the killer wasn't random. Each victim shared commonalities. They were women in their 20s to early 30s, petite builds, often from small, close-knit towns just outside Green Rock. None of them had high-risk lifestyles, which meant this predator was specifically targeting them as they went about their everyday routines. These weren't women who placed themselves in danger. This was a hunter stalking prey. Another fact kept gnawing at Detective Greaves's thoughts, the theory of escalation. "Killers like this," she mused during a closed-door strategy meeting that afternoon. "They don't start perfect. They make mistakes, maybe one that we just haven't caught yet, but as time goes on, they get braver, more efficient, and more savage." "And what's braver than doubling down?" Cole grumbled. He slapped a new case file onto the table. It was the report of a strikingly similar crime from 9 months earlier in a town just miles away. A young woman, killed by strangulation, her body found with her underwear also missing. Greaves flipped through the report, murmuring to herself. "We've got 2 killings, 2 missing sets of lingerie, 2 sets of tire tracks nearby. God damn it, this guy's been doing this for months, possibly years." "Don't forget the duct tape," Myers interjected. "He's restraining them. That takes planning. He's rehearsing this like it's a performance." She paused, her pen stalling mid-note. "But what if it's more than that? It's like he doesn't see them as people, they're just objects." Greaves nodded. "And he collects objects. They're his rewards," she said grimly. "As soon as he has them, he vanishes." Mocking the trails. Back at the sheriff's office, the team spent late nights pulling records of missing persons, suspicious deaths, and any odd behavior in neighboring counties. They weren't just looking for patterns in the killer's crimes. They were searching desperately for missed opportunities to catch him. "If we find where he's stashing these trophies, we can smoke him out," Cole huffed one night as they stared at the Green Rock map again. "He's confident now. That's dangerous. He's gonna screw up, and when he does, we'll have our chance." Even as they spoke, the killer was likely out there, his twisted collection of stolen undergarments hidden away in his private lair. Whether it was a basement, an attic, or some lonely shack deep in the woods, it didn't matter. The depraved ritual drove him. And somewhere in Green Rock, a man still walked unnoticed through grocery stores, gas stations, and streets, blending perfectly into the quiet life of the town. A man who, by all appearances, had everything under control. The frozen scene. "Jesus, it's worse than I imagined," Deputy Rachel Myers muttered under her breath, as she stepped out of the patrol car. The air was uncomfortably cold for this time of year in Green Rock, and the early morning frost still clung to the grass like tiny shards of glass reflecting the weak sunlight. Sheriff Cole followed close behind her, his boots crunching against the soft dirt road. "You step onto enough of these scenes, Rachel. You start thinking you've seen it all," he said grimly, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the cordoned-off area ahead of them. The chatter of officers and forensic personnel filled the air, but the overall mood was heavy. Then something like this comes along and knocks the damn wind out of you. The location was eerie, even in daylight. It was a desolate patch of land just a mile from the Green Rock Forest Preserve, surrounded by tall skeletal trees that acted like silent witnesses to the horror that had unfolded. The victim lay slightly off a narrow dirt road that meandered into the woods. Myers steeled herself and walked closer. Her stomach churned as her eyes focused on the lifeless body sprawled on the frost-coated ground. She had seen bodies before, as a rookie, and even during her more recent cases, but there was something particularly unsettling about this. The victim appeared almost staged, as if the killer wanted her to be found. "Details!" Cole barked at one of the forensic technicians, who had been carefully cataloging evidence around the body. The young technician, a pale-faced intern named Miller, stood up and spoke nervously. "Female victim, late 20s to early 30s, same MO as the others, Sheriff. Bruising around the neck is consistent with ligature strangulation. Based on lividity, she's been dead for about 12 hours, give or take." Cole knelt down, his knees creaking as he balanced himself near the body. "And the bruises along the ribs?" he asked, motioning with his calloused hand toward the deep purple marks visible through the torn remains of the victim's blouse. "Likely defensive wounds," Miller replied. "She put up a fight for sure." Myers looked at the victim's hands, frozen in a contorted, clenched position. "She fought hard," she whispered almost to herself, her voice tinged with an odd mix of admiration and heartbreak. "And still, he overpowered her." "Look at the neck!" Cole took off his hat, running a hand over his face as if trying to push away the grim reality before him. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment attack. That mark? That's from something thick, rope, maybe nylon cord, whatever it was, he knew exactly how to use it. "Jesus," Myers said again, instinctively wrapping her jacket tighter around her body, though it wasn't the cold that was making her shiver. "But why here? Why this desolate little patch of nowhere?" Greaves, now arriving on the scene, chimed in. "He doesn't want to risk being seen. This area is a perfect backdrop for what he's doing, isolated enough for him to take his time but close enough to a road to make his getaway quick." She leaned down, examining the ground near the victim. "And look at this." "What?" Cole asked, his tone sharp. Greaves pointed at the mud streaked across the soil a few feet from the body. "Tire tracks," she said. "Pretty fresh." "Tire tracks?" Myers leaned in, squinting at the patterns on the ground. "From a bike?" "Motorcycle," Greaves clarified. "See how narrow the tread is? It's lighter than a car, but it's got enough weight to churn up the dirt. He parked here with her." Cole grumbled under his breath and stood, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign conspicuously placed near the crime scene perimeter. "So he takes her for a ride, strangles her, dumps the body and takes off again, like always." "Wait, it's not just that," Greaves added, standing as well and brushing the dirt from her gloves. "He's staging these bodies. It's deliberate, the way her head is turned, the way her arms are splayed. He's not just hiding these women, he's leaving them for us to find." Myers, who had been scanning the surrounding tree line, turned to look at the body again. "What the hell are we dealing with?" she asked aloud. "This isn't just murder, this is theatrical." Cole exhaled a cloud of smoke, his eyes filled with a kind of jaded wisdom. "A predator, a showy one at that. This is him saying, 'Look at me, try and catch me.'" The cold wind blew through the trees, making the branches creak ominously, as if the forest itself mourned what had happened there. Myers suddenly noticed something glinting a few feet away, partially hidden by a mound of leaves. "Hang on," she said, pulling on a pair of latex gloves before stepping off the main path. She bent down and retrieved what appeared to be duct tape. "Duct tape," Greaves confirmed, eyeing the sticky, mud-caked strip. "The bastard restrained her first, like a hunter catches a goddamn deer." "Son of a," Cole muttered, tossing the cigarette into the dirt and stepping on it. "This guy's not just careful, he's calculated, smart. He didn't leave much behind, did he?" "Except for the body," Myers said softly, her voice tinged with frustration. "That's all he wanted us to find, just the body." As the team continued to comb through the scene, another officer approached from the outer cordon, his face pale. "Sheriff Cole, you need to see this," he said, pointing toward the other side of the narrow road. Cole, Greaves, and Myers followed. "What now?" Cole asked, his patience thinning. The officer motioned toward a patch of trampled grass leading further into the forest. We found more prints. From a vehicle? Myers asked. No, the officer replied. Boot prints, big ones, size 11 or 12, consistent with a man. Looks like he circled back after dumping the body, maybe to make sure she was positioned the way he wanted. Greaves let out a low whistle. This guy wasn't in a rush, he's comfortable out here. He knows this land. And that, Cole said as he adjusted his hat with a scowl, makes him even more goddamn dangerous. The longer he's out there, the bolder he's gonna get. The weight of his words hung in the air. The hum of the forensic team's equipment barely registered in the minds of the investigators as they stared into the shadowy woods. Somewhere out there was the man responsible. Somewhere out there he was likely planning his next move. The cool, frost-covered woods of Green Rock had become a stage for a shadowy killer. And whether it was a deliberate taunt or a twisted need, he had left enough clues to haunt the investigators, but not enough to stop him. Only one thing was clear: the game had just begun. Testimony from the lucky survivor. The interrogation room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional shuffle of papers. Sitting across from Detective Linda Greaves and Deputy Rachel Myers was Elena Harper, a petite woman in her late 20s who clutched a styrofoam cup of coffee, her hands shaking visibly. Her reddish-blonde hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes, a reflection of the nightmare she had narrowly escaped the night before. Elena's voice wavered as she spoke. I can still feel his hands on me. God, they were so strong. Like no matter how hard I fought, it didn't matter. I thought I was going to die. Greaves leaned forward, her gaze steady but encouraging. You're safe now, Elena. You're here, and we're going to make sure this bastard doesn't hurt anyone else. Take your time and tell us everything you can remember. Elena swallowed hard, glancing at the recorder on the table before nodding. Okay, I was walking back to my car. It was late, probably a little after 10. I parked near the edge of Millbridge Woods, just past that little coffee shop on the corner. I had stayed late at my friend's place and didn't think anything of it. It wasn't even that dark out, you know? The streetlights were on, and there was still traffic across the street. You didn't sense anything unusual? Myers asked, pen poised over her notepad. No, not at first, but then... Elena paused, her breath hitching. Then I heard footsteps. At first they matched mine. Distant, like someone walking a few yards behind me. I didn't think it was weird. People walk all the time, right? But then they sped up. Greaves exchanged a quick glance with Myers. How close did he get? Close enough for me to feel his breath down my neck. Elena's voice broke slightly and she looked away, her eyes welling with tears. I turned around, just instinct, I guess. And he was there, out of nowhere. A big guy, taller than me by at least a foot. He was wearing dark clothes, a hoodie or jacket maybe, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. I couldn't see him clearly, but his eyes, God, those eyes were cold, empty. Myers wrote furiously, nodding for her to continue. What happened next? Elena tightened her grip on the coffee cup, her knuckles turning white. He grabbed me, just out of nowhere. His arm wrapped around my neck like a vice, and I couldn't breathe. Then he pulled me toward the trees, deeper into the woods. No one saw, no one heard me. Greaves leaned forward, her voice calm but full of urgency. Do you remember anything about how he smelled? His voice, anything at all that stands out? Elena nodded, her lips trembling. He smelled like alcohol. Not just beer or wine, strong, like whiskey maybe, and sweat. And his gloves, they were thick. I know because when he used his hands to cover my mouth, I couldn't really feel his skin. It was like, I don't know, leather or something, but his voice... She froze for a moment, visibly shuddering. What about his voice? Greaves prodded carefully. He didn't say much, Elena whispered. But, when he did, his voice was deep, scratchy. And he wasn't yelling. It wasn't panicked or rushed. He just ordered me to stay still. It was calm. Almost too calm. Like he'd done this before. Myers's pen stopped mid-word and she glanced up. What did he say? Exactly, if you can remember. It was short, Elena said, closing her eyes as if replaying the moment. Don't scream. That's it. He just kept saying it. Don't scream, don't make this harder. Like he was... Her voice trailed off and she visibly trembled in her seat. Like he thought this was normal, like it wasn't the first time he'd done it. Greaves clenched her jaw, anger simmering beneath her careful demeanor. She gently pressed further. How did you manage to get away? Elena visibly stiffened at the question. I don't know. I don't think he expected me to fight back. I struggled. I was kicking, clawing at his arms, but it wasn't enough. He was too strong. Then I bit him, hard, his wrist. I bit down as hard as I could. Did he react? Myers asked urgently. Yes! Elena exclaimed, her eyes wide now. He swore, angrily. Then he let go, just for a second, long enough for me to pull away and run. I ran as fast as I could, screaming my lungs out. I don't know if he chased me, but I didn't stop running until I got back to the road. A couple in a car heard me and stopped to help. By the time I turned back, he was gone. Greaves nodded, studying her carefully. Elena, your story is incredibly important. If you can you describe anything else about him? His height, build, any distinguishing features? Elena exhaled shakily. He was taller than most men. Broad shoulders but not too bulky. He moved fast, almost like he was used to this. His face, I couldn't see much under the cap in the shadows, but his jawline seemed square, and... One more thing, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. He was riding a motorcycle. I heard it start up after I got away. An old one. It sounded loud, like it was falling apart. Myers jotted down the last note, and Greaves pushed her chair back slightly. You've given us more than you think, Elena. His gloves, his voice, the alcohol, the motorcycle. All of it helps. You did everything right. Elena's lips quivered. She let out a shaky breath. I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't managed to get away. Her voice cracked with raw fear. He's still out there, isn't he? Cole, who had been silently observing through the one-way glass, entered the room at that moment. He placed a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder. His usual gruffness momentarily softened. He is, Cole admitted gravely. But trust me, we'll find him, and when we do, we'll make sure he never sees daylight again. When Elena walked out of the station later that day, escorted by a patrol officer, the team sat in stunned silence, digesting the testimony. He's methodical, Greaves finally said. He had her in the woods, ready to do whatever sick ritual he's been repeating, and she still managed to escape. That's not gonna sit well with a guy like him. He's escalating, Myers added, her voice sharp. Every incident has been bolder than the last. It means he feels invincible, but it also means he's getting sloppy. This whole thing with the bite? He didn't plan for it. Cole grabbed his hat from the table and stood. Then we need to find him while he's still making mistakes. Start with every report of a guy with a fresh bite wound. Hit the hospitals, clinics, back alley doctors if you have to. I want a list on my desk by tonight. The room fell silent as the full weight of the case settled in again. Somewhere the man who had attacked Elena Harper was likely watching the news, going about his day as if nothing had happened. But for the first time, they had something he couldn't just erase. A small but vital chink in the armor of a monster who had stalked Green Rock for far too long. The Dragnet Strategy. Inside the conference room of the Green Rock Sheriff's Department, the air was heavy with tension, illuminated by the dim overhead lights and a single projector beaming a map of the greater Green Rock Forest area onto the wall. Red pins marked the spots where bodies had been found. Yellow pins indicated places of interest, abandoned cabins, dirt roads, old sheds. Detective Linda Greaves paced back and forth, her boots clicking against the tile floor, while Sheriff Cole leaned back in his chair, cigarette smoldering between his fingers despite the department's no-smoking policy. Deputy Rachel Myers, seated with her notebook open, tapped her pen anxiously against the table. "This guy isn't just a killer," Greaves began, her voice sharp but laced with frustration. "He's patient, methodical, careful. He knows this land better than we do. He's not stumbling into these women by chance. He's stalking them, selecting them, and executing his plan in places he scouted beforehand." "Damn right," Cole grunted, exhaling a puff of smoke as his eyes scanned the map. "Every one of these spots where we found a body. Look here." He jabbed at the pin locations with the tip of his cigarette. "All near roads or trails, but far enough out that no one's gonna just wander by and interrupt. This son of a bitch knows how to isolate his victims." "He's playing a game," Myers said quietly, her eyes fixed on the map. The room fell silent as her comment hung in the air. "He doesn't just want to kill them. If he did, he'd dump the bodies deep in the forest where no one would ever find them. But he's leaving them for us, for whoever stumbles across them, to see." Greaves stopped pacing and turned to Myers. "Exactly. He could dispose of them in ways that'd delay discovery for years. Instead, he's presenting them like some kind of twisted message, and he's constantly a step ahead of us. We need to start thinking like him if we're going to catch him." "Well, thinking like him's not going to come naturally," Cole said gruffly as he crushed the cigarette into a nearby ashtray. "But I'll tell you one thing. This bastard's cocky, and if he's as cocky as he seems, he'll slip up. We just gotta set up the right kind of trap." Myers frowned, leaning forward in her seat. "You mean bait him?" "I do." Cole's voice dropped and his tone turned serious. "We know his type. Young women, late 20s to early 30s, petite builds. He's not looking for chaos. These were deliberate choices. So we set up our kind of women where we know he patrols, make it look natural, make it look like they're just out for a jog or taking a late-night walk back to their car. Greaves sighed heavily. That's risky, Cole. You're talking about using one of our team as bait. What happens if something goes wrong? What if he takes the bait before we're ready to move on him? We don't give him the chance, Cole shot back. We control the environment. Cameras, undercover officers, unmarked units. As soon as he shows so much as a twitch in the wrong direction, we rush in and grab him. That's easier said than done. Greaves pointed back at the map. You're forgetting how fast he is. He works clean, efficient. He doesn't linger with his victims longer than he has to. If we move in too slow, he gets away. Move in too fast and he bolts before we even ID him. And worse, Myers added, her face tightening with unease. What if he panics and hurts whoever's playing bait before we can stop him? Cole looked between the two women, his jaw tightening. We don't have much choice, do we? Unless you've got a better plan to drag him out of wherever the hell he's hiding. Greaves tapped her finger against the conference table, her sharp mind working through the risks and likelihoods. The location's key. It needs to feel natural, like he's stumbled across the opportunity, not been lured into it. Somewhere isolated enough that he feels in control but close enough for us to respond immediately. Millbridge Woods, Myers suggested, her pen circling a yellow pin on the map. It's about time we focus there, close to the last attack on Elena Harper. Same layout. Lots of narrow trails and thick tree cover, but public enough not to look suspicious if there's just someone out for a jog. Could work, Cole grunted, leaning forward to get a better look. They just reopened the park gates last week after the snow melted. Early morning jogs, late-night walkers, families coming back, the traffic's been picking up again. And that's exactly where he'll be looking, Greaves added with a reluctant nod. All right, how many officers can we spare to cover the area without being too obvious? Cole thought for a moment before answering. 3 on foot. Undercover. Another 2 stationed in unmarked vehicles. A couple units ready for backup at all times. And I want someone operating surveillance nearby with access to thermal imaging. We're not losing him in the goddamn trees. And the bait? Myers asked cautiously, her voice wavering as she posed the delicate yet necessary question. Greaves hesitated before answering. I'll do it, she said finally. It has to be someone who knows the drill, not just some rookie who'll freeze up the second things go south. No, Cole said firmly, shaking his head. It's too dangerous, Greaves. You've got the experience, but so does Myers. No offense, Rachel, but you fit the victim profile better than Linda or anyone else on the force. Myers' breath caught in her throat, her pen stilling against the notebook page. She fixed Cole with a steady but nervous gaze. So that's it? I'm just supposed to go jogging out there and hope he takes the bait? You'll have backup every inch of the way, Cole assured her. You won't be alone for a second. You can wear audio and a tracking device, Greaves added quickly, sensing her hesitation. We'll be able to hear and see everything. The second you're in danger, we're on him. There was a long pause as Myers considered the weight of the decision. Then, with a slow nod, she exhaled deeply. Fine, I'll do it. But for the record, if this goes sideways and I end up being body number whatever, she said with a weak attempt at humor, I'm haunting you both. Greaves cracked a faint smile, but her eyes carried the same tension that filled the room. Deal. As the plan came together late into the night, each detail was meticulously laid out. Surveillance equipment was prepped, officers were briefed, and Myers began rehearsing her cover, down to the jogging route she would take, the clothes she'd wear, and the fake headphones she'd use to blend in. The next morning, the bait would be set, and the dragnets would close in. But none of them could shake the same unspoken thought. What if he knew? What if the predator they were hunting was already watching, waiting, and smarter than they'd imagined? The question hung like the frost over Green Rock. If Myers was going to step into the killer's world, she had to be ready, and they had to be better, faster, and sharper than ever before. Breakthrough evidence. The house looked like every other abandoned structure in Green Rock, weathered, lifeless, and swallowed by decades of creeping ivy and decay. The small shed behind it, however, was something else entirely, unassuming and almost hidden from sight. It wasn't even noticed until Deputy Rachel Myers, with mud-soaked boots and a flashlight in hand, stumbled upon it during a perimeter sweep after a grueling day of legwork. The search team was about to wrap for the night when Myers called out. Her voice echoed eerily in the biting silence of the forest. Hey! Sheriff! Detective Greaves! I've got something over here! Sheriff Cole and Detective Linda Greaves pushed through the thick brush, the dying embers of the day's light fading around them. By the time they reached Myers, the three of them stood frozen in front of the shed's weather-beaten door, its rusted hinges looking like it had been untouched for years. But something about it felt wrong. Cole adjusted his hat, his jaw set hard as his eyes scanned the surrounding area. Why the hell would someone keep a shed this far out from the house? Perfect goddamn spot to hide something, he muttered under his breath, reaching for his radio. Miller, get the forensic team over here now. Myers moved closer, shining her flashlight at the base of the door. Her beam illuminated the outline of something chilling, faint drag marks in the dirt leading directly to the shed. Greaves knelt down beside them, her gloves squeaking as she brushed leaves away. The marks were fresh enough to send a shiver down her spine. "This isn't just a storage shed," Greaves said, standing abruptly. "It's been used, recently. Look at the ground, this isn't years of junk piled up. Someone's been back here, maybe even the guy." Cole spit out the toothpick he'd been chewing on and gestured towards the padlock hanging askew on the latch. "We're not waiting around until tomorrow for a damn warrant to check this. Pry it open," he ordered a nearby officer. It took less than a minute for the rusted padlock to splinter into useless pieces. Cole stepped back, drawing his revolver in anticipation. Greaves, armed with a flashlight, was the first to push the door open, her pulse quickening as the shed shuddered and groaned under its own weight. The smell hit them instantly, a metallic tang mixed with the sourness of damp wood and decay. "Jesus!" Myers choked out, covering her nose with her sleeve. The small interior was cluttered. Piles of newspapers and dank cardboard boxes lined the far wall. In the center of the suffocatingly small space, however, was an old heavy metal trunk. Its surface was scratched and dented, the paint peeling away in flecks. There were large smears on top, dark brown, almost black, caked into its surface. Greaves exhaled deeply, the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. She pulled her gloves tighter and bent down, examining the lock on the trunk. "Bolt cutters," she snapped to an officer, her voice sharp and commanding. "If this thing's been sealed shut, I want it open 5 minutes ago." As the team scrambled to unseal the trunk, Myers crouched beside Greaves, her flashlight aimed over the detective's shoulder. "What are we thinking? Documents? Maybe weapons?" Greaves didn't answer. Her gut had been screaming since they found the damn shed. She had a suspicion, but she didn't want to say it aloud. Not yet. The lock clattered to the ground with a dull thud, and the officer leaned back, motioning for them to take the lead. "It's open," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking louder might summon the horrors within. Cole stood a few feet back, his face grim. "All right, Greaves. Let's see what this bastard was hiding." Greaves braced herself, hooked her fingers under the trunk's heavy lid, and lifted. The first thing she saw stole the air from her lungs. Inside the trunk were lined stacks of neatly folded fabrics, though their colors varied wildly. Some were white, some pink, some black. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, the truth crashed through her like a tidal wave. It wasn't just fabric. "Jesus Christ," Myers whispered, backing away instinctively. "No, no, no, no." Underneath the first few layers of what were unmistakably undergarments, Greaves found more. Dozens of them. Bras, panties. Some of them were clean, neatly pressed in a twisted display of organization, while others were crusted with old, dried blood. A few had what looked like initials scrawled into the fabric with a black marker. "These are trophies," Greaves said, her voice eerily calm even as her stomach threatened to revolt. "He kept them piece by piece, every single woman he took. This is what he brought back." Myers was nearly speechless, her hand trembling as the flashlight wavered in her grip. "You think these belong to all the victims?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Jesus, Linda, how far back does this go?" Greaves swallowed hard and looked at Cole. "We won't know until we cross-reference with the families. But I'd bet my badge this isn't his first trunk. This looks systematic, organized." Cole removed his hat, rubbing the back of his neck. His usual gruff demeanor seemed to crack for one fleeting moment. "This bastard's been doing this longer than we've realized," he muttered, his eyes dark. "This ain't just a murder spree, detective. This is goddamn collecting." As the forensic team processed the scene, more layers of the killer's disturbing ritual emerged. Beneath the undergarments they found small keepsakes, ticket stubs, patches of hair tied together with ribbons, and even a few Polaroid pictures, their images too dark and grainy to immediately make sense, but horrifying nonetheless. "Catalog everything!" Greaves instructed the team, her voice strained but steady. "Every single item. I need photographs and tags on it all. And bag those Polaroids. We might be able to recover something from them digitally." "So this is it," Myers said, standing next to Cole at the threshold of the shed. This is where he came, after every kill, to stash his goddamn souvenirs. Cole nodded slowly. Yeah, but the question is, does he have another place like this? Or worse, he said, his jaw tightening, is there someone else alive who's waiting to end up in his goddamn trunk? By the time they'd finished, the metal trunk and all its grotesque contents were safely secured in evidence bags. Cole gave the order to lock down the area, stationing deputies at the property overnight. As they left the scene, Myers kept her eyes glued to the surrounding woods with every step she took. Every creaking branch made her flinch, and every whisper of wind felt too deliberate. She couldn't shake the thought. The killer might have been standing there watching them the whole time, laughing as his secrets came spilling out. This changes things, Greaves said later in the car, her voice low but resolute. We can prove he's been targeting them. The DNA on this stuff, we link it to the victims and it's over for him. Myers exhaled shakily, gripping the steering wheel tighter. If this was only one hideout, she began, hesitating on her words. And there are others out there? Cole, sitting in the back seat, stared out at the darkened forest. Then we find 'em, he said gruffly. Every goddamn one. Green Rock was no longer just a quiet town. It was now the epicenter of utter terror, and no one knew how deep the rabbit hole went. But the shed, this trunk, was the first crack in the killer's armor. It was the evidence they had been desperately chasing, and now, for the first time, the predator was no longer invisible. The vital DNA evidence. The forensic lab buzzed with quiet urgency. The hum of machinery was constant, broken only by the occasional beep of computers and the rustle of papers as technicians moved between workstations. Files were stacked high, and somewhere in the chaos of the cluttered space lay the hope of breaking the Green Rock case wide open. Detective Linda Greaves leaned against the lab doorframe, arms crossed, her expression sharp but weary. She had skipped sleep again to catch the latest update. Beside her stood Deputy Rachel Myers, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee like it was the last thing tethering her to reality. Sheriff Daniel Cole was conspicuously missing, likely throwing his weight around at the station, but even without him the tension in the lab could have been cut with a knife. "You've got something, don't you?" Greaves asked, her voice low but tight with anticipation. Her eyes were fixed on the lab technician bent over one of the computers. Miller, the technician working on the case, swiveled in his chair and smiled nervously beneath thick glasses. "We ran the DNA analysis through the national database earlier this morning," he began, flipping through a stack of papers. "It took a few hours to process. There are a lot of partial matches, degraded samples, but we finally got something solid, a match." Greaves straightened instantly. "You're sure?" she demanded, moving closer, her voice sharp as a knife. Myers set her coffee aside, her heartbeat picking up. They had been through too many false starts, too many dead ends, partial matches, inconclusive results. It had all been maddening. If the DNA from the shed finally gave them a lead, it could change everything. "I'm positive," Miller assured them. He clicked a few buttons, and the screen behind him lit up, displaying a profile. The DNA matches samples taken from two of the other crime scenes, definitely belonging to the killer. But here's where it gets interesting. Greaves narrowed her eyes. "Go on." Miller adjusted his glasses before dropping the bombshell. "We found a match in CODIS," he said, referencing the Combined DNA Index System, the national database for criminal offenders. "It's not direct, a family match actually. A second cousin, male, late 40s, served time for assault charges about a decade ago, named Silas Gentry." "Holy shit," Myers breathed, the gravity of the moment sinking in. "A family connection, that narrows it down." Greaves turned sharply to Miller. "Where is he?" Miller was already ahead of her, clicking through his computer. "The cousin? He's clean as far as we know. Still living in Nevada, no recent offenses. But if this DNA link is accurate, our killer is related by blood. Whoever he is, he's definitely within the family tree." Greaves rubbed the back of her neck, the puzzle slowly starting to connect in her mind. "So, we've got our first breadcrumb. That's something." Her voice was thoughtful, but her eyes glinted with determination. "What else did the testing turn up? Any other traces from the samples? Clothing fibers, hair?" Miller nodded, flipping to another page of his notes. "There's more. Fibers matching the killer's gloves, most likely from leather. We've identified traces of whiskey residue mixed with dirt on the fabrics from the trunk. And then there's this..." His voice trailed off for a moment as he leaned back in his chair. "A partial boot print impression embedded in dried blood. It's faint but usable. Size 12, most likely a combat-style boot." "We're officially building a profile," Myers murmured, her mind racing. "DNA, leather gloves, combat boots, whiskey." She glanced at Greaves. This guy's painting a picture of himself without even realizing it. Oh, he realizes it, Greaves shot back, her tone icy. He's just too damn arrogant to think he can be caught. The door to the lab swung open abruptly and Sheriff Cole entered, hat in hand and his presence as heavy as ever. His gaze darted around the room before landing on Greaves. "Tell me you've got something!" he barked, closing the door behind him. "Or am I wasting another goddamn morning?" Greaves wasn't one to mince words. She gestured sharply to the screen Miller had been working on. "We've got a DNA match. Family connection out west. Silas Gentry. Not our guy, but close enough to lead us to him." Cole raised an eyebrow, pacing slowly around the room. "A family match? That's good." He tapped a finger against his temple, thinking, real good. If it's narrowed down to family, we can close the noose faster. But I'll be damned if this bastard doesn't keep slipping through cracks. What do we know about this Silas character? "Served a couple years for assault, no active warrants," Miller chimed in. "Last known location was Sparks, Nevada." "Could he be covering for someone?" Myers asked, tilting her head. "What if he knows who the killer is?" "Could be," Cole replied. "Or he's as clueless as the rest of the family. Either way, it's worth digging into his background." Greaves tapped the table, her mind running a mile a minute. "If the killer's connected to Gentry, then that narrows our pool considerably. We need full access to Silas's records. Family history, associates, known addresses. I want to know if there are any relatives living near Green Rock." Cole pointed to Miller. "You call Sparks PD. I want eyes on this Silas guy yesterday. If he's got even a hint of connection to Green Rock, we need to know. And get me full forensic results on those other samples," Greaves added. "I'm talking every microscopic detail. This guy's been getting away too long because he's careful, but nobody, not even him, can erase every trace." Miller was already typing furiously, his focus unwavering. "Yes, ma'am, I'll start pulling everything now." As they left the lab, the conversation carried a renewed intensity. Myers jogged to keep up with Cole and Greaves, her shoes echoing in the sterile hallway. "This is the break we needed," Greaves said, almost to herself. The steely determination in her voice had returned, sharper than ever. "He's not invisible anymore." "Slow down," Cole grumbled. "A name on a database doesn't mean we've got him. It means we're closing in, sure, but don't let your head get too big, detective. This guy's still out there, and if he figures out we're this close, he's capable of anything." Myers couldn't help but shudder at the thought. What if he knows we're onto him? What if he's already planning his next move? Or worse, what if he's already found another victim? Greaves stopped in her tracks and turned to them both, her expression somber but fierce. "Then we make sure there's no next move. We get ahead of him, block him in, and make damn sure he doesn't slip away again. If this DNA's the start of tracking him, then fine. But we don't stop until he's done." Cole nodded slowly, his jaw clenching. "Agreed. But the second we poke this hornet's nest, we hurry the hell up. We get Silas questioned, the DNA cross-checked, and boots on every trail he's ever been near." Myers sighed. "We're running out of time, aren't we?" Greaves pressed her lips into a thin line. "We always have been." Somewhere in Green Rock, the killer still lurked, unaware that the first sliver of his identity was now out in the open. For the first time the trail wasn't cold, it was heating up. As shadows lengthened over the small town, the hunt for its darkest predator truly began. The DNA match wasn't the full picture, but it was a crack in the foundation of his anonymity. The sheriff's team didn't know how long it would take to break him, but for the first time in months, they all shared the same thought. For once, they had the upper hand. The hunt for the imposter. The crackling radio static filled the interior of the unmarked cruiser as it sat parked on the edge of a quiet residential street. Deputy Rachel Myers adjusted her headset, glancing out the window at a row of rundown houses and pothole-strewn driveways. It wasn't the most welcoming neighborhood, but it was the last known location tied to their newest lead, a man who fit too many of the killer's characteristics to ignore. "You sure this is the place?" Myers spoke into her radio, her voice low as though the walls of the car might betray their secrecy. Detective Linda Greaves tapped the steering wheel impatiently, her eyes fixed on the dimly lit house 3 doors down. "It's the place," she confirmed, her tone clipped and focused. "Silas Gentry's younger cousin, Robert Gentry, 29, fits the height and build we're looking for. A loner. Local mechanic who's been out of work since the shop closed. And he owns a goddamn motorcycle." "Perfect," Myers muttered, sarcasm masking her unease. She took a sip of coffee that had long since gone cold. "And he didn't make the connection to the DNA match in CODIS?" "Not unless he knows we're onto him. Right now he's just a name that's popped up in too many places he shouldn't be," Greaves replied, a hand resting on her holstered gun. He's been spotted near Millbridge Woods on at least 2 occasions, and there's a history of behavioral complaints about him. No arrests, nothing on his record, but still, too much smoke not to notice. Sheriff Cole's voice broke through the radio. Eyes on him yet, or has he slipped out? His tone was gruff, his patience visibly wearing thin, even over the airwaves. Not yet, Myers responded. She squinted at the dim light in one of the house's windows. There's movement inside, but no sign of him stepping out. What are the odds he has any idea why we're even interested in him? Who knows with these sick types? Cole growled. Could be he's arrogant enough to think no one's even following him, or paranoid enough to know the second you glance his way. He paused, then switched tones. You got backup in position? 2 units are stationed a block away, Greaves answered, her tone cautious. If things go sideways, they'll be here in under a minute. We're not taking any chances. Good, 'cause if this is our guy, he's not getting away. Not tonight, Cole barked. Stay sharp. Hours passed with no movement. The night deepened, the town slipping further into its eerie quiet. In the car, Myers and Greaves did their best to stay focused, but fatigue was setting in. Staring down an empty street for hours, adrenaline on standby, had a way of taking its toll. You really think this is him? Myers asked softly, breaking the tense silence that had settled between them. Her fingers tapped idly on her knee. I mean, there've been so many wrong turns in this case. What if he's just some guy who hates people and spends too much time fixing his shitty bike? Greaves didn't answer right away. Instead, she kept her eyes on the house, her expression unreadable. I don't know, she admitted finally, but I do know the last time a lead felt this promising we didn't move fast enough. We second-guessed ourselves, waited for more evidence, and another woman paid the price. Myers nodded, the weight of those words sinking in. Right, she muttered. No room for hesitation this time. Just then, a loud engine rumbled to life, shattering the stillness of the quiet street. Both women snapped to attention, their eyes darting toward the house. That's him, Greaves said sharply, grabbing the radio. We've got movement. Motorcycle just fired up. Be ready to move. Through the windshield, they could see the front door of the house swing open. A tall figure in a dark hoodie stepped into view, helmet tucked under his arm. Even from a distance, his imposing frame sent a chill down Myers' spine. He walked with a deliberate, confident stride toward an old motorcycle parked haphazardly in the driveway. The bike itself matched the description from earlier reports. A battered black model with patches of rust and a sputtering engine that sounded like it was held together with duct tape. Greaves radioed the backup units. Suspects on the move. Stand by, but do not engage unless prompted. Got it, came the crackling reply. The man straddled the bike, adjusting his helmet before kicking it into gear. The roar of the engine drowned out the ambient noise of the night as he pulled out of the driveway, heading down the street at a steady pace. He's going, Myers said, gripping the dashboard out of nervous instinct. What's the plan? We follow, quietly. Greaves shifted the car into gear, pulling out after the motorcycle with the headlights dimmed. Backup stays out of sight unless we call them in. Let's see where he takes us. The motorcycle wound its way through the labyrinth of Green Rock streets, first cutting through residential neighborhoods, then veering toward the outskirts of town. Greaves and Myers followed at a safe distance, the tension in the car thick enough to choke on. Is he heading into the woods? Myers asked, leaning forward as if she could push the car closer with sheer willpower. Looks like it, Greaves muttered. Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. If he's going back to Millbridge Woods, then he's going back to his hunting ground, Myers finished grimly. The car crept along the secluded dirt road leading into the forest, the motorcycle's tail light glowing faintly up ahead. The road was uneven, lined with towering trees that seemed to close in on them like the jaws of a trap. Greaves killed the headlights entirely as they neared the trailhead. Pull over, Myers whispered. If we get any closer, he'll notice. Greaves nodded, parking the car behind a dense thicket. They stepped out silently, drawing their flashlights but keeping them switched off. From the distance, they could hear the motorcycle being cut off, its fading rumble replaced by the chilling sound of rustling branches and footsteps. He's going deeper, Myers whispered. Her voice held a tremor of fear and excitement. You think he's... Greaves nodded. Could be. If he's got a stash out here, evidence, trophies, anything, we'll find it. Backup's close enough to converge on our signal. She motioned for Myers to follow, the two of them slipping into the darkness of the forest. For nearly 10 minutes they moved in silence, their breaths muted and careful as they trailed the suspect. His figure was barely visible up ahead, his steps deliberate as he ventured deeper into the trees. Each new sound, the cracking of a twig, the whisper of leaves brushing against jackets, felt amplified in the oppressive stillness of the woods. Finally, the man stopped, crouching near what appeared to be an old storage box buried partially under loose dirt and leaves. Greaves signaled to Myers, her hand firm in the air to indicate caution. "Wait!" Greaves mouthed. Her free hand edged toward the radio at her side, ready to call in backup. "He's doing something!" Myers strained to see but froze completely as the man stood suddenly, his head snapping around as if sensing their presence. For a horrifying second, he stared into the darkness where they were hiding. Greaves tensed, her heart pounding against her ribs. Was he onto them? Then, without warning, the man turned, pulled on his helmet, and bolted back toward the motorcycle. Greaves cursed under her breath, pulling her radio. "Suspect fleeing on foot! Back up! Move in! Now!" The forest erupted into chaos, flashlights cutting through the dark as officers closed in from every direction. The hunt had entered its final stage, and if the predator thought he could escape this time, he'd learn the hard way that the net was tightening. Tonight, the hunter had become the hunted. The case was far from over, but for the first time the team was breathing down his neck. A tense ambush. The night was cold, unnaturally quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the dense forest surrounding Millbridge Woods. The ambush had been weeks in the making, every piece of the operation meticulously planned. Detective Linda Greaves stood hidden among the trees, her breath puffing visibly in the frosty air. She adjusted her earpiece, hearing the coordinated chatter of the team spread out in the dark. "Everyone in position?" came Sheriff Cole's gravelly voice through the comm, calm and controlled despite the gravity of the moment. "South perimeter secure," reported Deputy Myers from her post near a dirt path leading toward the woods. She was gripping her flashlight tightly, her nerves betraying her otherwise steady tone. "North side set, no sign of movement yet," another officer chimed in. Greaves pressed the button on her earpiece. "West is locked in. He won't be slipping through this time." The plan was simple. The suspect, Robert Gentry, had been drawing patterns around Millbridge Woods, returning repeatedly under the cover of darkness. Whether he was revisiting crime scenes to relive his twisted acts or hiding trophies from his gruesome kills, they didn't know for sure. But they knew tonight was the night he'd come back. They'd baited the area earlier, making subtle changes to entice him, shifting debris near an old hunting shack, leaving obvious signs of a recent search. This time, the trap was set. "Eyes on the dirt trail," Myers whispered into her mic as a faint rumble echoed in the distance. Her adrenaline spiked instantly as the sound grew louder. "I think that's him. Motorcycle inbound from the north." Greaves tensed, her flashlight sitting idle in her hand as she watched the trailhead from her cover. Through the dense trees, the flicker of a faint headlight rose over the hill and weaved toward the woods. It was the same battered black motorcycle, the one spotted in surveillance and the one described by their survivor, Elena Harper. "That's him," confirmed Cole. His voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, as if this moment carried the closure of months of frustration and anguish. "Everyone hold. Let him get comfortable." The team stayed motionless as the motorcycle slowed and came to a stop at the edge of the trail. The man dismounted, a tall figure in a dark jacket. Even in the limited moonlight, they could see his purposeful movements, the way he surveyed his surroundings like prey assessing for predators, a routine built from years of confidence in never getting caught. Greaves knelt lower behind a tree trunk, her eyes locked on him. "He's heading toward the shack," she murmured into her comm. "Wait until he goes inside," Cole instructed firmly. "Contain him there. No mistakes." Myers' hand was trembling now, her knuckles white against the grip of her flashlight. She steadied herself with a deep breath, watching as Gentry moved farther down the trail, vanishing briefly into the shadows of the trees. When the suspect reached the shack, he lingered near the door, pulling a flashlight from inside his jacket. The weak beam swept across the entrance. He hesitated at first, but then pushed the creaky door open and disappeared into the dark space. "Target is inside," Greaves confirmed. "Copy that," Cole responded, his voice hardened. "On my mark, we close in. No one moves until I give the go." The moments dragged by, the forest eerily silent except for the muffled clatter of movement inside the shack. Greaves could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she counted the seconds. Everything depended on precision. If they moved too early, Gentry might escape. Too late, and they might lose him again. "All units," Cole finally said, his voice like a trigger being pulled. "Move in, now!" The forest erupted into coordinated chaos. From every direction, flashlights snapped on, beams cutting through the black void of the night. Officers stormed toward the shack in silence, the crunch of boots on frozen leaves the only sound accompanying their approach. "Sheriff's Department!" Cole barked, his voice slicing through the night as he approached the door with his revolver drawn. "Robert Gentry, come out with your hands up!" Inside there was a loud crash, metal clattering against wood as if he'd dropped something heavy. Then, silence. "I said come out!" Cole shouted again, now inches from the shack's entrance. His hand motioned for the officers behind him to fan out across the clearing. Greaves stepped forward cautiously, her own firearm drawn. "He's not running," she murmured, narrowing her eyes. "Something's not right." Inside, the faint glow of Gentry's flashlight was visible, still lying on the floor, but there was no sign of him moving. "Cover me!" Cole ordered to Greaves and Myers as he breached the doorway. Greaves pivoted to watch the trail behind them, ensuring no surprises from an unexpected escape route. The shack was cramped and rancid, smelling of damp wood and something worse, metallic and sharp like rusting blood. Inside, Cole's beam swept the space, landing on the far corner where a stack of crates sat partially open. Greaves stepped inside after him, her light focusing on the crates' contents. "Jesus," she muttered, recoiling slightly. The crates were filled with items that didn't belong in any hunting shack. Torn pieces of clothing, fragments of rope, even a few broken necklaces, all trophies of past crimes. And on top of one crate sat a hunting knife, its blade edged with dried blood. "He left this here for safekeeping," Cole said darkly, his expression cold. "Bet he's been coming back here for years." "Where the hell is he?" Myers asked, standing just outside the shack, her flashlight scanning the tree line. Then, there was movement, a sudden violent rustling of branches from the south side of the clearing. "He's running!" an officer shouted from across the perimeter. Greaves bolted out of the shack, adrenaline surging as her beam caught a shadowed figure darting through the trees. "He's heading south!" she yelled into her radio. "Cut him off before he reaches the secondary trail!" The forest came alive with the rush of pursuit. Officers sprinted through the darkness, their flashlights bobbing wildly as they chased the suspect. Gentry was fast, too fast considering the terrain, but he wasn't invisible. He couldn't outpace the coordinated ambush. After several minutes of chaos, a loud yell broke out over the radio. "We've got him!" By the time Greaves and Myers reached the scene, Gentry was on the ground, pinned under two officers. He was thrashing violently, cursing and snarling like a wild animal caught in a steel trap. "Get the cuffs on him," Cole ordered as he approached, his hat slightly askew but his gun still in hand. "And take that damn helmet off!" As one of the officers yanked the helmet free, Gentry's face was finally exposed under the glow of multiple flashlights. His expression was one of fury and desperation, his lips curled into a twisted snarl. But there was no mistaking it. It was him. "Robert Gentry," Greaves said as she stepped into the light, her voice calm but laced with satisfaction. "You've got a lot to answer for." He didn't respond, his chest heaving as his eyes darted wildly between the officers encircling him. He finally spat onto the ground, a venomous grin spreading across his face. "You don't know a damn thing," he hissed. "You think this is over?" Cole leaned in close, his tone dangerously quiet. "Oh, it's over," he said, "and you're done." But as they hauled Gentry toward the waiting cruiser, Myers whispered to Greaves, her unease creeping back. The way he said that, it didn't sound like a bluff. What if there's more to this? Greaves didn't answer, but the weight of Myers' words settled over her like a shadow. What if this night had only scratched the surface? For now, though, the predator was in custody, and Green Rock breathed its first sigh of relief in months. Still, the dark echoes of his words lingered. "You think this is over?" If there were more questions left to answer, they'd find them. Whatever it took. The frightening confession. The dull yellow light of the interrogation room flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the cold steel table in its center. The air inside was thick, thicker than it had been in any interrogation room Greaves had ever set foot in. For hours, Detective Linda Greaves and Deputy Rachel Myers had been sitting across from Robert Gentry, who remained disturbingly calm. Shackled handcuffs clinked slightly whenever he moved, but they seemed to irritate neither him nor his smug demeanor. Sheriff Cole leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his sharp glare locked on Gentry without flinching. It had been hours of mind games, of layered questions, and of pushing pressure points to break him, and Robert Gentry had said nothing. Until now. "You're really proud of yourself," Cole grumbled, snapping the silence like a twig underfoot. "Sitting there all smug like you're untouchable. You really think walking around with a goddamn grin is gonna save you? We've got your DNA, your trophies, and your face connected to every damn spot where this has gone wrong. What part of that says you're in control here?" Gentry tilted his head slightly, cracking his neck. For the first time since he was dragged into custody, that twisted smirk of his widened. It made Myers' skin crawl, though she wouldn't let it show. You think I didn't want to be caught? Gentry said, his voice low and scratchy. It was the first thing he'd said in hours, and his sudden willingness to speak electrified the tense room. Greaves leaned forward immediately, her sharp gaze locking onto his like a predator. "What does that mean, Robert?" she asked, her voice level but firm. Gentry chuckled, the noise grating and almost gleeful. "You don't get it at all, do you?" He leaned back in the chair, the chains around his wrists clinking with the motion. "The whole time, you were playing my game. You think I just left those bodies out there on accident? You think I didn't know you'd find that shed eventually? Hell, I wanted you to. You don't get far in life if no one's paying attention to your work." Cole's jaw tightened and his fists clenched. "Killing 10 women isn't work, you sick bastard. It's murder, plain and simple." Gentry grinned, his teeth flashing under the dull light. "You call it murder, I call it art. You ever understand what it's like to create something perfect? And for a while it felt like I could keep going forever. Find someone, take them, mold their last moments into something unforgettable." Myers couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Unforgettable?" she snapped, her voice rising despite her better judgment. "You call what you did to those women unforgettable? You tortured them. You stripped them of everything. That's the point," Gentry interrupted, his voice cutting through hers like ice. He leaned forward this time, his eyes glinting with a mix of excitement and cruelty. "They weren't just random. They were chosen. Do you know what it feels like? Hunting them, watching their routines, who they talk to, where they feel safe, and waiting for the perfect moment. There's no rush like it, planning every second, watching the light go out in their eyes and knowing, that's mine now." "Shut up!" Cole barked, his voice booming. He slammed a hand against the wall, the sound reverberating through the boxy room. "I don't give a damn about your twisted crap. What I do care about is justice. For all the families who've been mourning, for all those lives you destroyed." "Oh, Sheriff, that's cute," Gentry quipped, tilting his head mockingly. "You think sticking me in here, putting me on trial, actually changes anything? I'm already untouchable. They'll talk about me for years. I'll live on in their nightmares." Greaves placed a hand on Cole's arm to stop him from pacing toward the table. She took a breath, keeping herself calm while her stomach churned at every word coming out of Gentry's mouth. "You mentioned planning," she said, narrowing her eyes at him. "You see yourself as artistic. But what happens when the paint runs out, Robert? We've followed your patterns, found your trophies. You've slipped up with the DNA. Do you really think there's more to this legacy of yours?" Gentry didn't reply right away. His lips curled upward again, but this time, his grin wasn't as wide. His jaw tightened slightly, and his eyes darted toward the one-way mirror occupying the far wall of the room. "What's funny," he said softly, "is how much you think you've found." He stared down at his hands for a moment, the cuffs reflecting dimly on his skin. Then, almost inaudibly, he muttered, "But you haven't even scratched the surface." The room fell silent. Even Cole, for all his bluster, wasn't sure what to say next. Myers' pen, which she'd been gripping tightly in her hand all night, fell quietly onto her notepad. "What do you mean?" Greaves asked carefully, her voice piercing through the weighted silence. Gentry tilted his head back to meet her gaze again. "You think 10 bodies will be the end of it? Go ahead. Celebrate your big win, detectives. Throw my ass into a cell and pat yourselves on the back. But much like a tree in the woods, if you only see what's above the ground, you miss the roots." Myers leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "How many, Robert?" she demanded. "How many people have you killed?" Another chuckle rumbled out of his chest before he gave his answer. "Let's just say," he hissed, "that double digits is just the warm-up." For several moments no one spoke. The feeling in the room was suffocating now, like the walls were physically closing in. Robert Gentry's grin hadn't faded, and the longer they looked at it, the more his arrogance twisted into something terrifyingly unhinged. Finally, Cole broke the silence. "You're lying," he said flatly. His voice, usually harsh, betrayed a hint of unease. "Maybe," Gentry said carelessly, shrugging his shoulders as far as the handcuffs would allow. "Maybe not. But who's going to find them now without me?" Greaves stepped in before Cole could react, her voice steely as she shot back. "We found you. We'll find the rest." Her eyes narrowed as she leaned just close enough to match Gentry's smug proximity. "And don't flatter yourself, Robert. You might have fooled a bunch of strangers into thinking you were untouchable, but you've made too many mistakes now. We'll dig the roots out, one by one." For the first time, Gentry's grin faltered. It was fleeting, just a flicker across his face. But Greaves caught it. She stood back, crossing her arms as if to make her own mental checkmate. When the questioning ended hours later, Greaves and Myers left the room first, their steps heavy but deliberate as they headed into the hallway. "What do you think he meant by roots?" Myers asked, her voice tight as she walked alongside the detective. "He admitted to 10, but what if it's 20? 30? What if there's more than we can even count?" Greaves' jaw clenched as she turned a corner. "I don't know," she admitted, her tone grave. "But whatever's out there, we'll find it. Even if it takes the rest of our goddamn careers." Behind them, through the one-way glass, Sheriff Cole stood watching Robert Gentry. Slowly, ever so slowly, the man quietly muttered something under his breath that went unheard by everyone else in the room. But his sinister grin didn't fade. For Greenrock, justice for 10 lives would never feel like enough. And while Gentry sat smugly behind bars, his haunting declaration that there was more left the team driven, yet shaken to their cores. What horrors had yet to resurface, and how deep did the roots he spoke of truly go? Justice delivered. The courthouse was buzzing with tension, the air thick with anticipation as reporters crowded the steps and cameras flashed incessantly. It had been months since Robert Gentry's arrest, and the Greenrock community was holding its breath, waiting for the conclusion of a story that had gripped the nation. Inside, the trial room was packed to capacity. Grieving families, reporters, and curious spectators sat shoulder to shoulder, the collective weight of their silence hanging like a storm cloud over the proceedings. Detective Linda Greaves and Deputy Rachel Myers sat in the second row, their seats strategically placed behind the prosecution's table. Neither woman had spoken much that morning, their usual sharp banter dulled by the importance of the day. Sheriff Daniel Cole stood near the back wall, arms folded, his hat grasped tightly in one hand as he scanned the room with a guarded expression. The trial had been long and grueling. Victim after victim's stories were retold in excruciating detail. DNA evidence, the contents of the shed, surveillance footage, all of it had been stacked against Gentry like bricks in a cold, unyielding wall. Yet, despite the mountain of evidence, Gentry's smug demeanor had rarely wavered. Even now, as he sat at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit, his lips curved into that sickening half-smile that had haunted so many. "He doesn't look worried," Myers muttered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs in the courtroom. She tightened her grip on the edge of the bench, her knuckles white. "How the hell can he sit there like that?" Greaves didn't look at her. She was too busy staring at Gentry, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. "Because he thinks he's still in control," she replied, her voice as cold as the fluorescent lights above them. "He's a textbook narcissist. Doesn't matter what evidence we have, he still believes no one can touch him." Myers shook her head in disbelief. "After everything we've uncovered? After all those lives he stole? This case should have been over the second we found that DNA." She glanced sideways at Greaves. "Do you think the jury sees it the same way we do?" Greaves finally looked at her, her expression unreadable but tinged with exhaustion. "They'd better." As the judge entered, the room fell silent, save for the shuffle of people standing in unison as court protocol dictated. Gentry kept his gaze forward, his face unreadable for the first time since the trial began. Maybe the pressure was finally getting to him, or maybe he just liked the theater of it all. The jury filed in next, their faces similarly unreadable, each step they took echoing louder than the last. Myers held her breath. Cole shifted his weight from one foot to the other at the back of the room, his jaw set as he watched the jurors take their seats. Even Greaves, who was usually a master of controlling her emotions, couldn't stop her fingers from fidgeting with her pen. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice steady but carrying the gravity of the moment. The judge, an older woman with a stern expression and a permanent crease between her brows, adjusted her glasses as she addressed the court. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a woman in her 50s who had spent the trial looking more tired and burdened with each passing day, stood slowly. In her hands she held the paper that would decide the fate of a man who had terrorized Greenrock for years. "We have, Your Honor," the foreperson said, her voice clear but heavy. Myers felt her heartbeat thunder in her ears as the courtroom held its collective breath. She leaned slightly forward as if closing the distance could let her hear the words faster. The judge nodded. "Please read the verdict." The foreperson unfolded the paper, her hands steady despite the tension in the room. "On the charges of first-degree murder," her voice paused and time seemed to stretch unbearably thin, "we find the defendant, Robert Gentry, guilty." The silence broke like shattered glass. A wave of gasps, murmurs, and quiet sobs rippled through the room. Some of the victims' family members clung to each other, crying softly, while others simply closed their eyes, their faces frozen in raw grief and relief. Myers exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Finally," she whispered, her voice trembling. She glanced at Greaves, who nodded once but remained quiet, her expression a mix of satisfaction and somber reflection. This wasn't celebratory, not yet. The foreperson continued, her voice unwavering. On the additional charges of aggravated sexual assault, unlawful confinement and obstruction of justice, guilty. And on the matter of sentencing, the judge interjected, leaning forward slightly on her podium, this court has already reached a decision following the jury's recommendations. Robert Gentry is hereby sentenced to death by lethal injection. The finality of the words sent a ripple through the courtroom. Gentry didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't react to the weight of the verdict. But for the first time since his arrest, Greaves thought she saw a flicker of anger behind his otherwise composed mask, a small crack in the ego he had so carefully cultivated. Cole's voice rumbled low from the back of the room. That bastard thought he was untouchable. He's not, Greaves replied shortly, her eyes still fixed on Gentry. He was being escorted out by 2 guards, the sound of his chains clinking against the tile floor as he walked. But before he crossed the threshold of the door, he looked over his shoulder, eyes locking onto the bench where Greaves and Myers sat. His grin was back, crooked and venomous. This doesn't end here, he mouthed, the words clear and deliberate even in silence. Myers shivered, gripping the bench tighter. Did you see that? She whispered. God, he's still trying to get inside our heads. Let him try, Greaves said, her tone firm and low. He's headed for death row. He doesn't get to scare anyone anymore. Outside the courthouse, the cold, crisp air hit them like a slap, a stark reminder that life was carrying on beyond the courtroom walls. The media mobbed the steps, their voices blending into a chaotic cacophony of shouted questions and camera shutters. Detective Greaves, how do you feel now that the verdict's in? One reporter yelled, a microphone shoved toward her face. Do you think justice has been served? Another chimed in. Myers stepped forward to respond, but Greaves stopped her with a hand on her arm. Not here, she said quietly. She turned back to make her way to the unmarked cruiser, Cole already walking ahead of them. As they reached the car, Myers finally broke the silence. So, is this it? Is it really over? Greaves paused, her hand on the door handle, her breath visible in the chilly air. For the families, I hope so, she said softly. But for us? For Green Rock? She shook her head. There's always another monster waiting out there, Rachel. We caught this one, but we can't pretend the world's safer now. Cole, leaning against the car, lit a cigarette and exhaled deeply into the night air. Doesn't mean we stopped the fight, he said gruffly. You both did good, but don't hang up your hats just yet. If Gentry's got roots, as he loved to say, we've still got work to do. The town of Green Rock was quieter that evening than it had been in months. For the first time there was a collective exhale, a sense that perhaps the worst was behind them. But for the detectives and the families left with gaping holes in their lives, the road ahead still carried lingering shadows. Justice had been served, but closure? That would take much longer to come. Justice wasn't just about locking up monsters, it was about carrying their victims' stories forward, without letting the world forget. Greaves, Myers, and Cole climbed into the car, leaving the courthouse behind but carrying the weight of the case with them, just as they always would. The Dark Legacy of Green Rock. It had been 6 months since Robert Gentry had been sentenced to death, but the shadow of his crimes still loomed large over Green Rock. The town, once a picturesque escape filled with forest trails and quiet suburbia, now bore the invisible scars of a nightmare that couldn't be forgotten. Streets felt quieter than they should be, windows stayed shut more often, and even the laughter of children seemed muted, as though the weight of what had happened had seeped into the very air. Deputy Rachel Myers leaned against the railing of the Green Rock Police Department's front steps, sipping faintly lukewarm coffee out of habit rather than need. The sky above was the kind of dull gray that had become all too familiar, a sky that never promised much, not even light. Detective Linda Greaves pushed the station doors open behind her, stepping outside and letting them swing shut with a slow creak. She adjusted her jacket against the biting wind and approached Myers quietly, stopping by her side and sharing the same somber view of the empty street ahead. Still can't drink coffee in there, huh? Greaves asked, glancing sidelong at the younger deputy. Her tone was an attempt at lightness, but it fell flat. Myers gave a faint smile, void of humor. Nah, place feels too heavy now. Things like coffee don't taste right in rooms that held survivors and grieving parents. Or that bastard. Greaves followed her gaze, letting the silence stretch between them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar now. After the trial, the camaraderie of the department had become quieter, softer. Words were fewer, but they carried more weight. Everyone dealt with the aftermath in their own way, even if none of them were totally sure how to let it go. "Do you think they'll reopen the trails?" Myers asked finally, nodding in the direction of Millbridge Woods, though the dense forest was far from visible from their small patch of concrete. Greaves shrugged, her hand brushing against the side of her holster in unconscious habit. "Maybe someday, but not soon. People don't want to walk those trails anymore. They don't see the trees or the open air anymore. They see burial grounds." "They should," Myers muttered, her voice hardening. "That's exactly what it was to him, a goddamn playground." Greaves didn't disagree. The woods had become infamous, reduced from a peaceful escape to a graveyard of horrors thanks to Robert Gentry. Every corner now carried whispers of his twisted games, of the countless nights he'd prowled beneath those trees, feeding the darkness inside him. Nothing about Gentry's sentencing had truly felt like the end. While the courtroom had erupted in soft sobs of relief and quiet thanks when the death penalty had been delivered, the streets of Green Rock hadn't felt any safer in the weeks that followed. Gentry had been locked away, his venomous grin sealed behind steel bars, yet people still double-checked their locks. Curtains pulled shut earlier in the evening, and porch lights became the brightest they'd ever been. Even the department had changed. Sheriff Daniel Cole had taken to sitting in his office later into the evenings, often long after everyone else had gone home. Rumors swirled among the staff that he was poring over old files, cross-referencing every missing persons case in the region from the last 20 years. The phrase Gentry had murmured during his confession, that chilling, insinuating talk of roots, had taken root in Cole's own mind. Over the months, Cole's obsession became something of an open secret. No one talked about it openly, but everyone saw the bags under his eyes grow darker, and the tension in his jaw tighten. Myers, too, noticed how he'd started keeping the office blinds closed and paper files scattered across his desk, in a way that might have been intentional disarray or the product of exhaustion. Greaves noticed it most of all. Cole, usually the one with steady directives and the firmest grip on reality's dark underbelly, now biked a fine line between logic and paranoia. Gentry had gotten under his skin. Under all their skin. "I went to Elena's house last week," Myers said suddenly, snapping Greaves out of her thoughts. "Elena Harper?" Greaves asked quietly. "Our survivor?" Myers nodded. "Yeah. Well, I guess I thought it might help her to know someone from the department hasn't forgotten about her." "And?" Greaves prompted gently. She's alive," Myers replied hesitantly. "But you know, she's not really living, she's different. Every sound makes her jump. She keeps the lights on all day, and she's got 2 locks on every window, 3 on the front door. Green Rock isn't safe to her anymore. Hell, the world isn't safe." Myers' voice broke slightly as she tightened her grip on her coffee cup. "She survived him, but he still got to her. He still owns a part of her fear." Greaves exhaled softly, her gaze distant. "It's the same with everyone, the families, the neighbors, even the damn tourists who used to pass through. Gentry did more than kill people, he killed peace. He killed Green Rock's ability to just breathe." Inside the station, the phone began ringing. It jolted Myers back into the present moment, and she turned slightly, her hand brushing over her belt as if ready for work. "You expecting anyone?" Myers asked, frowning. "We're always expecting something," Greaves replied. A hint of dry wit slipped into her voice, but it faded as the phone stopped ringing only to start up again seconds later, the shrill tone cutting sharply through their reverie. "I'll get it," Myers said, stepping toward the door, though her unease was hard to mask. Greaves didn't follow her immediately. For a moment she stared out at the empty street again, her eyes flicking over the houses with their drawn blinds, the deserted storefronts, the quiet alleyways. It was as though the whole town was holding its breath, just waiting for something else to go wrong. Green Rock wasn't the same, and Greaves wasn't naive enough to think it ever would be again. Gentry's name had become synonymous with fear. He wasn't just a predator, he was a permanently scarred chapter in the town's history. A name that would be whispered in hushed tones long after his execution date was set. When Greaves finally stepped back into the station, her footsteps echoing against the tiles, Myers was standing by the front desk, the phone pressed to her ear. She caught Greaves' gaze, and her face was pale. "What is it?" Greaves asked, the hair on her neck rising instinctively. Myers hesitated, her lips pressing into a hard line as she lowered the phone. "That was Cole," she said finally, her voice heavy. "He's in his office. He found something." Greaves didn't need to ask what. They both knew. The roots Gentry had mentioned might have meant more bodies, more victims, the kind of horror they'd all hoped was finished, but somehow knew in their guts wasn't. "You ready?" Myers asked. It was half a question, half a quiet plea. Greaves' jaw tightened as she started toward the back hallway. "We don't have the luxury not to be." In Greenrock, Gentry's dark legacy hadn't disappeared. It lingered in the air, in the woods, in every locked door and hidden glance. The people in the town kept trying to move forward, but forward still felt far away. For Greaves, Myers, and Cole, there was no end in sight, only shadows to keep chasing. If the monster had left roots behind, they would dig, and dig, and dig.